Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to today's live webinar, The Successful Board Candidates Roadmap. Great seeing so many of you tune in, and I hope everyone's doing well. We have a highly anticipated webinar today, so let's get to it. As many of you know, the purpose of these webinars is to educate, inspire, and empower global leaders like you to help modernize boards and ultimately make boards more efficient. So you are very important. Our expert speakers bring a wide range of current leadership and board-related topics to the table. And shortly, you'll meet the board architect, Mark Pfister, and he will reveal the common mistakes of most board director candidates make in pursuit of a board seat and the 5 must-dos for serious board director consideration. My name is Red, event manager for Shapeparency and today's webinar moderator. Before we begin, let me introduce you to our webinar host, Shapeparency. Shapeparency is a user-friendly, cost-effective digital platform with all the features your board needs to thrive. And that includes modern digital security, an ever-growing series of board effectiveness measurement tools, and board education partners. Our founder, Ben, is on a mission to make an impact in the board industry and modernize boards and governance operations, and also make them more efficient and less boring, as he would say. 3 quick reminders before we begin. Please write your questions in the Q&A section as we go. Our goal is obviously to answer all of your questions at the end of the presentation. But if we do run out of time, we will follow up with you following the webinar. The webinar is also being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording and Mark's presentation deck within the next day or so. If you hold the globally recognized International Board Director Competency Designation, IBDC.D certification, you will receive 1 CPE credit for attending this webinar. Now, I'm happy to present today's webinar speaker, Mark Pfister. He is a governance and strategy expert, non-executive director, and chief board consulting, having consulted and advised hundreds of public, private, and nonprofit boards. Mark is known as the board architect for his work in defining the structural components of effective boards. His book, Across the Board, The Modern Architecture Behind an Effective Board of Directors, is a bestseller with circulation in over 70 countries. He is the creator of the International Board Director Competency Designation, IBDC.D, a globally recognized board and board director education and certification. Here is Mark Pfister and the Successful Board Candidates Roadmap. Welcome, Mark, to our virtual stage.
Thank you, Red, and thank you to Shapeparency for having me today. It's quite exciting, and this is a topic that I am passionate about. When it relates to directors, whether you're an aspiring or experienced director, truly making an impact to get to that board seat, to get into the boardroom, and to make a difference, and not just make a difference for the organization that you're serving, but also in the world itself. And I do believe a board director has the ability to make global change. So let me first go through, and I'll kick off, Red, if you're ready for me. Okay, all right, so this is the path of the journey I'm going to take you on today as it relates to your candidate roadmap. So number 1, I want to talk a little bit about your board director viability. And we'll talk about these aspects of what does it mean, whether you're an aspiring or experienced director. Are you in the right area? Do you have opportunity? Do you have chances? What is the ability for you to get to that interview and get to the board seat? I next want to move into board candidate packaging. This is one of the most missed areas and misunderstood areas for candidates, experienced and aspiring directors typically make. And I can give you some firsthand experience from the clients I work with, the board clients that I work with, as it relates to building their nominating committee processes and doing much of their interviewing for many of my board clients. I want to talk number 3 about board candidate pre-work. And what this means specifically is, how are you preparing to understand the business, the industry, the company, the board that you're potentially going to interview in front of, and is it truly an organization you want to be working with? Number 4, board interview readiness. We'll touch on these topics. This is, I'll give you some experiences I've had in interviews of directors where I'll call it the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll talk about that. And then I want to leave you off with number 5 here, this opportunity decisioning process. And I'm known for saying that 90+% of the board seat opportunities that are offered to you, you should actually say no to. And that has to do with the fact of them just simply not being the right fit, that organization, that board not being prepared to expand, the board not having an onboarding or orientation process, all of these pieces that truly affect not just your success, but the overall board and the overall organization's success. So that's the journey I'm taking you on today. And as Red mentioned, we'll get to questions as soon as we're done going through these topic areas. Okay, your board director viability. First, some interesting data. And I too was quite surprised. I knew we were making inroads with this understanding that you don't have to just be this experienced director to land additional board seats. And if you're an aspiring director, well, it's going to take you 10, 20 years to land a board seat. It's really not working that way currently. And I'll use just one example. And this is really what I'm seeing globally currently, but the US example here, and I was able to find this data. This particular report from Heidrick and Struggles talked about the fact that a record share of board seats were filled by first-time directors on public boards, 43% actually in the Fortune 500 across 2021. I personally believe in what I'm experiencing and seeing right now in the board industry. I believe we're going to see this number either stay the same or increase slightly throughout 2022 when that report comes out, likely in early 2023. So just know that this particular global trend of who boards are looking for is absolutely in the favor of not just experienced directors, but absolutely in the favor of aspiring directors, and not necessarily aspiring directors that solely have former CEO experience or former CFO experience. You'll see those trends and those percentages here also. We're truly entering an age where your expertise and your experience, even very focused, very drilled down expertise and experience, is being welcomed and is needed on boards currently. So with that backdrop, we'll talk a little more about what boards are looking for, but that should give, especially aspiring directors, an extreme amount of hope right now that they're on the right path, there's opportunity out there, and they truly can make an impact by joining these boards. All right, also on this topic of who boards are looking for, modern boards have truly realized the value in these 5 areas. Designing a board with mixed industry makeup. I'll talk a little bit about this when we get to some of the board architecture components for today to help you understand a properly structured or architected or designed board. But just know that the standard that I'll say that's understood by most board architects or those that are structuring boards is that you shouldn't really have more than 25% of the makeup of your current board from the industry in which that organization or that board serves. Sounds almost counterintuitive, but the point is to bring in expertise and experience from other industry areas above and beyond the deep governance and the deep strategy experience those individual directors bring. That leads us to leadership and deep operations experience. This was something years ago that really wouldn't be touched on or discussed too deeply because we'd say, well, we're really looking for the leadership aspect of somebody joining this board. But I want to be clear in this that, and this is a topic we speak about in depth in the board education and certification course, in that there are many leaders today that will enact or weigh in on strategies for an organization or even governance models for an organization that have been so separated from the actual operations experience that they're not able to right size their governance and their strategy input or their guidance as a board director. So we're in this shift right now where we're looking for a balance of not just the leadership, governance, and strategy, but also a tie-in to that hands-on or that operations experience, which allows someone to be much more successful, especially as a board director. We're, of course, including historically underrepresented directors. This has to do with the diversity aspect of boards. Deep strategy, knowledge, and governance. This is another big area where we talk about not just someone coming in with the ability to govern, to weigh in on what's happening, what's right, what's wrong, what their input is from a governance lens, but again, weigh in from a strategy viewpoint that also has a tie back to this operations or this recent experience as it relates to operations. And I mentioned a moment ago, and I'll say it again, the specialized vertical knowledge directors. So it used to be that all directors were kind of viewed as generalists that had a finance background and maybe operated as a CEO or a CFO, and now they were already primed with that background to be a director. Well, what we found over the last so many years is that that's great, but to truly get this deep expertise and the proper sounding board for a CEO and proper governance models and effective weigh-in on strategies, we really need a little more depth as it relates to this vertical knowledge of directors. So we're seeing very specific expertise areas being called into the boardroom. A few examples of this can include ESG. It can include a big one right now in the technology realm is the cybersecurity area. So we're seeing a lot of this infusion of very specialized vertical knowledge areas into the boardroom. So keep this in mind. Don't think that you have to conform to what has been for decades now, the acceptable director's background and titles. Know that you can be yourself in this. Take what you've learned, take what you know, and apply it in the proper way. We'll speak in a little while about how you package that properly. Also, as it relates to the viability, can you dedicate the time? And in the course, as well as in the speaking that I do, and especially when it's in person, the speaking that I do, this is usually when the mouths open and the jaws drop and people start to say, you know, wow, this is a lot of time here. Are you sure this is correct? And I want to be very clear in this, that as a board director, it's not just about doing a little prep work before the quarterly or the whichever your frequency of board meetings are, and then joining the board meeting, and then you kind of disappear for a while until the next prep for the upcoming board meeting happens. Use this as your baseline. We talk about, we won't get into this today, but just know in many of my writings and my teachings, we go in depth about what does this time breakdown actually apply to. For our purposes today, know that you have to dedicate time to this. So use this as a guideline that your universal base duties alone will require about 200 hours a year. And this, I believe, is true of public, private, and nonprofit organizations. And I'll even go out on a limb and say that private equity type organizations or their portfolio companies also require this, although I know that the current acceptable number is around 80 to 100 hours a year. I will just, for universal base duties, I will just tell you straight on right now and straight up that I have not met a truly successful board director put in less than 200 hours per year for their base duties, including research, weigh-in, sounding boards, all the things that are important for this. Now, we tack on hours to this based on committees you serve on, or if you're the board chairperson, or if you're a committee chair. So know that if you are on a board, you're on 2 or 3 different committees, you're looking at a significant amount of time, well over 300 hours plus per year, to truly serve that board correctly and truly be considered successful on that board. Now, I know there's nuance to this, but understand that whether you are the most efficient and effective director or you're not, start to think about this based on the number of boards you take on. If you're in a current role that requires already 60 to 70 hours a week of your time, it's probably not the right time for you to join a board and truly make that impact and truly be building that reputation for yourself for future board opportunities. Now, one additional nuance to this, COVID-19 has really shown a sharp increase in the amount of time required by directors, as you can imagine. In the early stages of COVID in February-March timeframe of 2020, I can tell you that boards went into overdrive in terms of their involvement, their time commitment, and it was extremely obvious for those that were what's called overboarded. They were serving on too many boards. The number of missing directors from board meetings was extremely high in the 6 to 8 months following that announcement of COVID and the lockdowns and all the different things we experienced. Don't put yourself in that position. You're not doing yourself any favors. You're not doing your board or those organizations any favors by being overboarded. Keep this time commitment in mind. It's very important. All right. So we covered some of the viability areas. I know we scratched the surface on this. I'll show you as we get to the end of today's presentation and where you can find out more of this information, some of the links to articles and other areas. So now I want to move into this board candidate packaging. And I will say again what I said earlier, this is one of the most missed and most misunderstood areas for directors. And I want to give you this roadmap or this high-level view of how you should be thinking about this. And I can tell you from sitting on, still to this day, sitting on both sides of the table as a board director inside the boardroom and as a board advisor and consultant to boards from outside the board looking in, this is extremely important to fully understand. Don't waste your time on anything else. If you're not doing this correctly, spend the time to get on the right path. So, number one, you should not be submitting a regular bio, a regular resume, or a regular CV for board opportunities. And the main reason for this is that, and I'll use the resume as an example, a resume was designed for employee level positions. This year I worked here, then I got promoted. This year I worked here, then I changed a job. These years I worked here. It's not by any means showcasing the areas that you want to stand out as a senior leader relating to your functionality in the boardroom. So there's different formats for these. The proper format, regardless of what anybody calls this, the proper format and the proper terminology for what you submit for a board opportunity, they're called your board documents. And what do these actually mean? So if we break this down from a high level, your board documents with an S include a specialized board bio, not a professional bio, not an executive bio, but what's called a board bio. Also within this umbrella of your board documents, there's something called your board document. Sorry if that's confusing, but it's another breakdown. It's similar to a resume, but it's very specific in the blocks of how you list information in there to allow your senior level leadership, your previous board experience, your C-level leadership, your governance expertise and ability to rise to the top. And that is the purpose of a board document. Together, your board bio and your board document are called your board documents. Now, in the past, I've actually stopped at this description, but then all the questions at the end were about, oh my God, what is this? I've been sending resumes, I haven't been, or CVs, or I only send a bio. Let me break down a little bit these areas for you just to give a little more detail to this. So again, a resume or CV is not the same as your board document. A resume guides you down the path of sounding more like management and less like leadership and governance material. Put the proper effort into this. When you receive a copy of this presentation in a day or so, as Red has mentioned, you'll be able to click on some of the links here to get to articles I've written on these topics, which you may find very helpful. They're embedded throughout the presentation and available to you once you receive this presentation. So high level, still on the same topic about what you submit for a board opportunity. Your board bio truly is serving the purpose of getting across your personality, your leadership personality, and your core leadership traits. So I'm going to spend a little more time on the board document area because I think that's a little bit more important, but just know that you're not looking at the standard blocks of paragraphs that you would include in a professional or executive biography. You're looking at areas, even in a specific order, that call out your expertise and your experience, but with the aspect of your personality infused to it. A board bio should typically be written in third person, meaning someone else is stating these things about you. And that truly is the right way to look at this. Now, your board document, this is written in first person. And in doing so, you are now claiming your expertise, claiming your experience, claiming all the aspects of what makes you a great leader, great in strategy, great in governance. And this is really what separates the true candidates from those that, and I typically call them the board hobbyists versus the board disciplined. And this is truly a way of understanding this. Even in how you name the file name of this document's important. So a client of mine recently, I'm working with them on building out their nominating committee process. They also have a board seat opening up shortly from a mandatory retirements requirement of that board. So in doing so, we opened up and looked for candidates. We went many different routes in this. And of the 1,200 or so submissions we had globally, I would tell you that probably only about 22 of them or 23 of them submitted properly, even down to properly naming the file. Instead of calling it a board resume or board CV, the file name was correct. They called it board documents. I laser focused on those people because, again, I know they're not just a hobbyist that sent in an existing resume or CV they had for the opportunity. So the board document breakdown is quite easy and can be quite clear. And again, it positions you for the right type of information you want to get out as a senior leader immediately. Start with a board profile summary. This is truly an exercise in concise and precise writing. This is basically a very high-level summary, probably 5 to 8 sentences of who you are, how that applies to your leadership style. Now, instead of going into the resume or CV format that says, okay, this year I worked here, or these years I served on these boards, you're breaking out all of the previous board and board committee experience into the first section following your board profile summary. Now, some may say, well, I don't have any board or board committee experience, and that's fine. And that's when we move into the next level. If you have board and board committee experience, you absolutely list that. And you next move into board level experience. Again, some will only have board level experience, won't be able to list board and board committee experience. Board level experience is not that you served as a voting or fiduciary appointed board member, but in your position or one of your positions or any of your positions in the past, you actually had interaction with the board. You were asked to come present to them. You, on a quarterly basis, are asked to provide data and information that's rolled up to the board for decision making. You are called into the boardroom or were called into the boardroom to make a presentation on a topic that was of significance or importance to that board and that organization. That board level experience is truly a differentiator because it shows that if you were to be invited onto the board, you also understand what it's like to be in a position of presenting to the board, knowing the right way to present to a board, not getting necessarily into the nitty-gritty, but being able to summarize, showing the level of governance and strategy viewpoint that's important to the board and how you present it to them. Very important, an area that's usually missed in any type of submission, whether it relates to a bio or a board document. Your executive experience, of course, again, even if you're not in the C-level currently, doesn't matter. Remember back to that statistic I showed you earlier about the number of people actually being called to serve in boards. List out any of the leadership experience that you view as relevant. Of course, your education, your certifications, your membership, professional affiliations. Lots of detail here. There's things that we call vertical board certifications and horizontal board certifications. We go in depth in that in our board education program. Just again, know that you are making this particular document very specific to senior leadership, board directorship, and areas that can be easily correlated to proper governance and proper strategy. And then one of the big differentiators here is that a board document or any type of resume or CV, and in this case, even a board document, can really go against the principle of showing who you are. What is your personality? How do you lead? What are what we call your core leadership traits and your demeanor? And I'm a firm believer that you want to find a way very cleanly in your board documents to list out this differentiator of your core leadership traits. Show that you're not just a corporate or executive robot. Show in some way that you have ethics and values that are built into how you lead. This again is a big one. I can tell you I make a lot of decisions in the yes pile for an interview for a director if I feel throughout their bio and their board document that they've gotten across in some way that this is not just about the robotic action of ticking off boxes, but it's truly somebody that I would enjoy working with, and that they have a personality and that they know how to work with people. Something called respectful dissent comes to mind. When they're not agreeable, they're still respectful. These are the types of things that fit into these core leadership traits that you should definitely get across in some way, especially in your board document. All right, so I know I'm bombarding you with all this information, but know that you'll have ways to follow up on more of the detail here. I just want to plant this seed today and make this impact, so you know you're not submitting things that won't make the impact, especially if someone like me is sitting on the other end receiving that information. I want you to have the best shot possible of getting to that interview. By the way, and I'll state this again when we get to the interview area, I'm to the point where I believe that getting to the interview for a board seat is actually harder than getting the appointment in today's world. Think about that for a minute. The amount of competition out there, the volume of people looking to move into the board space, I believe, again, that it's harder to get to the interview than it is to get to the appointment. So front load everything I'm stating or pulling out from that statement, front load this to make sure that you have the best opportunity possible to make it to the interview. When you make it to the interview, it's either yours to win or yours to lose at that point. All right, let's say, and let's celebrate, you've made it to the interview. It's the hardest step in this whole process, I believe. All right, so what is the pre-work you should have done? You've gotten the call, they tell you in a week and a half, we'd like to see you. What are you doing next? Well, you need to be sure you're coming across as fully prepared for your interview. This is going to weigh into many aspects of how you're viewed. I won't read all of these here, but just make sure you're doing your research. You have the ability, especially for public companies, to get a wealth of information going back years and years. For as long as that company has been listed publicly, you have just about as much information as that board or anybody could, or even an investor, by going back through these forms here, the annual reports, the 10Qs, the 10Ks. The 8Ks are extremely good because you can find out any areas that were deemed to be material to the organization or the business or the investors. Those are disclosed. Great way to show that you're up to speed with those organizations during the interview. Private companies are typically tougher to get information on. Just know you can still do a lot of research on this and find out information on these organizations before you get to those interviews. Nonprofits, of course, they have to file. Similar to public companies, they have their own forms, their own backgrounds, information. Very easy to find that information. One other thing I want you to start looking for is the organization that you're interviewing with, have they issued what's called a board pitch book or a board director invitation? I create a lot of these for my clients now, and it truly shows that board has their stuff together, and it allows candidates also to understand information that's important to the board. So this is typically in a presentation format, maybe 8 to 14 pages. It's issued by a board to those candidates that they consider to be viable. Sometimes it's different levels or details in these board pitch books. Start to look for these. They include a ton of great information. You see some of those listed here. And you really start to get that feel for if the board itself is a hobbyist or a disciplined board if they're issuing this particular document. Board pitch book or board director invitation. All right. Also in your pre-work, be sure to absolutely dig into the understanding of how a board is structured. So this has been a focus of mine for many years. The last 10 years, I've collected data on this. My book that you see behind me is exactly on this topic. There is definitely the good, the bad, the ugly as it relates to board structuring. And I'm going to first say that at this point in my career, I truly and wholeheartedly believe that 90% of board-related challenges and failures are directly related to that board structure. And if you start to understand, and even the difference between the word structure is how the board is designed. Architecture, I believe, and the reason I like that word is that it focuses more on the proactive aspect of the design of the board. Whether you're designing a board from scratch, it's the first time in a private company that you're building the board, or if you are re-engineering or redesigning or re-architecting an existing public company board. Know that there is a formula to this. And it's not only looking at the step one here, the sphere of influence or the skill set, competencies, and experience. It's looking at other extremely important 50+% of the success of a board comes down to what we call its planes of congruence. These are, well, I'll get into that in one moment, some of the details of that. And coverage and balance is another area. All of this weighted against properly enabled board committees. I thought I had one other slide. Oh, I do have one later. I'll go a little deeper into this in just a moment in another area. But know that this is the pre-work that you want to do to make sure that you understand the type of board that you're joining and if you're going to be successful. And I'll even tack on at the end of that to say, if this board and organization will put you personally at risk. And we have to keep that in mind. We're going to touch in a short moments on the topic of insurances and indemnification. So that's all the board candidate pre-work focus areas you want to do. Spend some time educating yourself on these components to ask the right questions, to do some investigative work to see if the board is structured properly and the architecture of that board is correct. And don't be scared to say no to an offered board seat if many, some, or all of these pieces are not properly at play in that particular board. I famously state, and I think I mentioned this earlier, that a large percentage of the board opportunities that come your way, you actually want to say no to because the risk is just simply too high. All right. Board interview readiness. Step 4 in this. So now you're moving into the board's interview process. This is just before and during the board interview. Where should you aim this discussion? Now, some may find this funny and say, well, isn't the nominating committee or the board director aiming where they want the discussion to go? And the answer is yes, partially. But I can tell you nothing is a worse impression than when I'm interviewing a board candidate and it's one-sided. I ask a question, they answer. It's a very monolithic type of discussion. There's no, number one, it's not fun. And number two, it's not allowing me to see other areas of how you lead, your background, your personality. So one of the tricks in this, and I hate to say trick, but one of the areas that you can leverage for where do you aim the discussion, be sure that no matter what you're asked and in your answers, or if it's time for you to ask questions, or in how you infuse different topics and expand on just one monolithic answer to a question, show that you have depth in this in important areas that are focused on in the boardroom, number one. And those that know me, it's not by surprise that they see values sitting up there first and foremost at the top. I'm going to spend a few more moments after this slide on some more topics on values to show you why I'm so bought into this. You want to know exactly where you fit. Number 2 here, this goes back to what we mentioned a moment ago on the board architecture components. Whether the board has announced or not exactly where you fit, you want to spend your research and your time on research, understanding how is the board currently structured? Where would you fit into this? Are there gaps that you're filling? Is it just one area they're asking you to fill, but there's other areas you can overlap into to expand on conversations and the depth of decision making? That understanding exactly where you fit is more than just, I have this experience and background, they're looking for this type of board member expertise, I'm a fit for this. It's much deeper than that, as for those that will spend more time in understanding and researching board architecture. Strategy and governance. It's not by chance that I mentioned strategy always before governance. Understand that you cannot be good at governance if you're not good at strategy. Once the goals of an organization are set, or the goals of the board are set, those are the what and the why of the organization and the board. Once those are set, what are you actually governing in the boardroom? A large percentage of governance in the boardroom, after the goals are set, you are governing the strategy, which is the how we're going to support those goals, how we're going to reach those goals. So if you don't understand the background of strategy, what strategy actually is, and if you don't understand the strategy of your organization, it is absolutely impossible to govern properly that organization or weigh in. And this is, again, another simple yet largely missed aspect of directors today, where they don't understand deeply the goals of the organization, or they don't understand the strategy of the organization. All of that typically falls under the umbrella that they don't understand strategy to begin with. Be the person, be the director, be the board candidate that understands the interrelationship of strategy and governance. I'll share with you one of my most favorite questions in the board interviews that I host. It's the following, and I usually ask this within the first 10 minutes to see if I want to continue the conversation. Here's the question. Tell me about your understanding of the interrelationship between strategy and governance. Tell me your understanding about the interrelationship between strategy and governance. If there is any hesitation in that, I can tell you that interview is typically not going past 15 minutes. It is impossible, again, for you to govern properly without a deep understanding of what strategy is and the strategy or the how of that organization. Can't stress it enough. Learning mentality. Are you a person that is a continuous learner? Now, this is not just about being the person that's on the cutting edge of the latest knowledge that's out there or the latest technology. There also is, understand this, there also is a direct correlation to the learning mentality, somebody who is able to say, I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Someone that is continuously learning new concepts, that person typically has less of an ego. They're not scared to ask questions. They're not scared to look like someone that doesn't know the answer. Keep this in mind again. If someone has lost or never had the learning mentality, they typically have ego getting in the way. Ego is terrible for governance. Ego is terrible for strategy. Ego is terrible for something we're going to talk about in a moment as it relates to EQ and MQ, emotional intelligence and mindfulness intelligence. And that leads us into the other intelligences. I just mentioned two of them. There's a few more I look at or try to look at and study as it relates to not just the existing balance of the other intelligences on a current board, but also deeply drill into this. I deeply drill into this as it relates to board candidates. Let me expand a little bit on this topic of values. So everybody says, well, values are important, of course, right? But if you can't draw it on one page, you don't really understand it. So this is the way to view values in an organization. Values sits above the vision and the mission and everything else in your organization. So the values are, what do you stand for? What do we stand for? The ethics, principles, and beliefs in which we are going to guide our vision, what we're going to aspire or enable in the future, and also will help our mission or guide our mission, what we do well now. It is impossible to do this proper guidance of the vision and the mission of an organization, which, by the way, is the responsibility of the board through the CEO, without focus on the values. And we're going to make the correlation now of values into culture. And this is another great visual to understand how to look at values relationship to culture and the overall organization. So it should not be a surprise in this view that you see risk sitting in the middle of this governance visual. But what's a surprise to many, and we go into a lot of depth in this in the board director education and certification course. This is a foundational aspect of proper governance and the proper integration of strategy. If your focus is only risk in the center, it's very easy to get off track in what you're looking at, how you're solutioning areas, how you're mitigating risk, without the component or the overlay of the values and the culture. And make no mistake, when you are evaluating risk, the thing you should be thinking about simultaneously is what is the effect or the possible effect or the outcomes on the values and the culture of our organization in our current approach. And that sentence I just stated is truly a strategy which fits internal or inside of your governance model. So again, it's impossible for us to separate this governance and strategy interrelationship. So this is why somebody who is a versed director or somebody versed in governance, they truly understand the right questions to ask in a board interview and seeing if you're ready for board directorship. based on the fact if you understand the interrelationship of risk into the values and the culture of the organization before you start talking about talent and performance and compliance and reporting in those areas. Keep this in mind, understand this very deeply. These are questions I will always ask either directly or indirectly to make sure a board candidate is on the right path with how they view the world. And know right now, when I use the terminology of board candidate, I'm talking about both equally an aspiring director and an experienced director. And in many cases, it's easier to work with an aspiring director because they have not seen the bad things that happen in many boardrooms or the bad behaviors. I spend a little bit more time digging into the values and the culture relationship with risk as it relates to governance, believe it or not, with so-called experienced directors. I need to know that they're on the right path, that their training has been correct, that their experiences are being applied correctly, and they're not just repeating bad behaviors that they've seen in other organizations. All right. Do a quick time check here. All right, Red, I know I got a few more minutes here before we go to Q&A, so I'm keeping an eye on it. All right. I started to talk about this a moment ago of this overlay of governance over the top of how strategy fits into an organization. And if you had to peel back the mind of a truly successful senior leader, especially a board director, they would be thinking in the following way. First off, they would say, okay, strategy sits between goals and tasks, or you could say goals and milestones in an organization. And this very simple view can be quite valuable to you in any of your leadership positions, especially in the boardroom, because now it's very easy to overlay the governance model on top of this. So as a director, if I look at all these areas, very simply, this is how I'm guiding my mindset and how I interact, the types of questions I ask. If it's a goal-related area, I'm involved in setting and in mainly as it relates to governance, ensuring the relevance of the goals. I am constantly asking myself as a director, are the goals we're aiming towards still relevant? And you'll start to see by asking those questions, it's almost impossible to set a strategy for 2, 3, 4, 5 years out. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. It should constantly be revisited, but think about constantly ensuring the relevance of those goals. Even asking that simple question, infuse the goals into some of the earliest steps in every board meeting to make sure that people understand, your directors understand that we are going to constantly reevaluate these goals at the highest level to make sure they're still relevant. Okay, they're still relevant, great. Now, where do we move our governance mindset into this? Now, as it relates to strategy, how are we getting things done? It sits between objective and action. So if strategy is the how, your governance requirements and mandate as a director is to consistently and constantly validate the approach of that strategy. Think about it in these terms. And then, without going too tactical, whether it's tasks or milestones, create that scorecard or that dashboard that allows you to measure the progress of those tasks and milestones. I'm not saying to bring the board meeting or as a board director, start digging down into the nitty-gritty tasks of the organization, but there should be very specific areas that you're monitoring and measuring, your metrics that relate back to the delivery of the how. So goals are the what and the why, strategies to how we're going to get this done successfully, and then the when and the who are the tasks or the milestones. Start to think in this very simple mindset, believe it or not, as a director, and you'll find much success in the questions you ask, in the guidance you give. This methodology actually can help you shorten board meetings by a significant amount of time if you're focused in this mindset. I hope that's helpful for our audience today. All right, aiming the discussion also to getting across the importance of your other intelligences, right? I'm going to focus quickly on emotional intelligence. I'm just going to read 2 quick passages here. I know we talk about EQ a lot, so in other areas. This is from my book specifically. EQ is a leader's ability to recognize, understand, and manage their own emotions, along with the ability to recognize, understand, and influence the emotion of others. Extremely important. Am I getting that from my interview with you? Are you in tune with areas that allow for me to understand your emotional intelligence? Another important one we don't hear much about, but it's absolutely fascinating and extremely important. I believe it's the yin to EQ is the yin to MQ's yang. And you can't be a great leader without having both of these. MQ specifically is the process of bringing one's attention to the internal experiences occurring in the present moment. Think about the power of this, not only in the boardroom, but the power of understanding a board candidate if they are present, if they have this MQ and they're able to position their questions and their answers in the current moment. Extremely powerful. There's many other ones here we won't have time to get into right now. We delve into this further in my book as it relates to proper board architecture, and of course also in the board education program. All right, one last area here, Red, and I'm still watching the time here to allow for questions. Be the board candidate, aspiring or experienced, that is not overcome with the flattery of being offered the board seat that immediately answers yes. This happens commonly. There are many instances of buyer's regret. I like to call it appointee's regret, where 3 to 6 months in, they realized that the indicators were there that they were not going to be successful on this board, but they were so flattered with it being offered to them that they took it. Ask yourself these questions honestly. Is this board truly successful? Is this board truly making a positive impact? And is the board respected? Keep these things in mind. Make sure the board is living up to its mission. Again, I won't read all of these here, but are they promoting meaningful action? We go back to that strategy and governance overlay right now as it relates to meaningful action. Are they trustworthy? Are they fostering accountability? What are they actually doing in these areas? These are not just yes, no answers. They are process answers about how the board particularly does these things. Focus your questions in a board interview on finding out the answers to these 5 important focus areas for a board. Right, I think I'm going to go just in our available time right now. I'll just bring up these other areas here. Know again that in your evaluation of the board, touching again on the board architecture area, there is a methodology, there is a formula. You can predict. I use this all the time in what's called a board architecture assessment. It's very easy to predict the current and future success of a board by looking at these 3 areas, not just what most boards do, which is number 1 here, but drilling down further into what's called their planes of congruence. This is the board's character, and the coverage and balance, which is the board's depth. It truly is more, it is possible, and it's extremely insightful to understand, and you do have your crystal ball being able to predict if these boards are going to be successful. Leverage these things. All right. Last thing in the area of your decision making, understand are you protected? Ask this question, find out the information to this. Most directors believe that they are covered simply by indemnification of the corporation or the D&O insurance, and that the D&O kicks in first. Absolutely not true. The indemnification is there first. If there's some sort of insolvency or some area that's not covered, typically the D&O will come into that, or your hope is the D&O comes into that. What I mainly want to point out here is also understand there's another area here that you can get this coverage individually as a director called Independent Director of Liability, IDL insurance. And it's not expensive. It allows you to cover yourself as a 3rd area of protection above and beyond the corporate indemnification and the D&O insurance. I would tell you just in summary of this page, running out of time right now, it is not worth serving on any board, even a nonprofit, which has the same liability personally to you as a director. You're a voting fiduciary member of even a nonprofit board. You need to have additional protection. The IDL insurance is available to you. Do some research on this. Use this as your 3rd area of protection. The personal liability of being a board director is quite high today. Cover yourself. All right. All the aspects we talked about for modern board architecture, all the topics today, we go into more detail in my book. Also know that in our board education and certification program, these topics are delved into even on a deeper level with the testing and the certification. The ability for one-on-one group or on-demand programs are available at any time. What makes this program different is that it's not just modern day board operations, but it's also touching on topics that we mentioned about how to properly package yourself, how to build yourself up with your knowledge to show that in your board documents, even coming up and finalizing what we call your major and your 3 minors. All right. And the third area is that it's a global certification. Please stop focusing on education and certification in the board space that is only related to regions. We are well past the realm now, or the time frame, where if you're certified in a regional or country as it relates to board directorship, you feel that you're being evaluated on that as a positive thing. You're not. I am looking for global areas of knowledge. Even a 2-person startup has supply chain concerns and employee concerns globally. Start thinking about board directorship globally, not just regionally, in your education and your certification. All right, Red, a little bit over a few minutes. Hopefully we have enough time for all the questions that come in. Just in summary, approach your board directorship as a discipline, not a hobbyist. Put the effort into properly packaging yourself first, and always remember back to your values. Thank you.
I thank you very much, Mark. This was not only inspiring, I'm sure not only for me, but for everyone. And I thank you for sharing this insightful information and the tips of this. I see a lot of questions coming through, so I'm going to jump right into our Q&A. So if you haven't added your question as of yet into the Q&A, into the chat or question box, then do that now. So give me a second here and let's see who's first in order. So what is the best mindset and approach for the aspiring directors and current executives looking to get the first board seat who have already received directorship certification credentials?
And I'm assuming when we say mindset, meaning the expectation to land, maybe I'll talk about a few areas if there's not further clarification on that. There's a few areas of mindset on this, right? So you feel like you have the proper background, you have the right experience. First off, don't think this is going to happen overnight. Even if you're packaged properly, you're going to have to take time to get into your groove of looking for opportunities, finding those opportunities, positioning yourself and talking about the proper areas during your interviews. Having said that, don't wait to the future to get yourself prepared for this. There's prep work in this. Get yourself in that mindset. This takes years to get to that point of truly getting to the point of being properly packaged, being that resource or that go-to director. That's number one. Number two is, in terms of mindset, is view your board directorship truly as a service to the organization. Now, I know there's money to be made, there's equity to be gained in many cases in terms of your compensation as a director, but your mindset should not stray from the fact of that terminology of you serve on a board. You are doing this because you want to bring success to that board, to that CEO, to the employees of the organization. So the mindset of this is that you will work tirelessly to ensure that you're focused in the right areas that bring value to the organization, regardless of whether you're compensated or not. So there's multiple layers of mindset in this. I always like to say your mindset in any area of the board directorship vertical, whether you're focused in the consulting realm of that, as I am, or the board directorship realm, which I'm also focused in. I am consistently using that terminology and thinking and comparing against the word of impact. Is this truly making an impact? Am I simply going through the motions of showing up for a board meeting or preparing for a board meeting to do the right thing as it relates to check boxes that we touched on these topics? Or is this truly making an impact for the organization? And there's nothing wrong with being a little bit selfish in this and saying, am I making an impact for myself? Is this truly what I want to be doing? Do I feel successful in this role? Is this the type of board and organization that allows some individuality and wants to hear other ideas and allows me to present them? And even if they say no, at least they heard me out, so I feel like I was respected. These types of mindsets are this sharing mindset and this respectful mindset of how to position yourself for truly thinking about working on a team, working in a team environment, working with a group where when we describe a board, there's no S on that. It's the board. So whether you're 5 people or 15 people, you're one entity. That is the mindset you want to come to. You have to be able to work with these people properly. I hope that's helpful in answering that question.
Thank you, Mark. And we only have a few more minutes, so I'm going to, if you can keep it short and sweet, that'll be great, so we can get to more questions. But otherwise, of course, we will follow up with you. So how much can or should a board member get involved with the executives of the organization in order to maximize his or her contribution towards the goals?
Yeah, I know we hear that overused terminology of noses in, fingers out. Typically, the board as a whole should be interacting directly with the CEO. There are some nuances to this, and I'll call them positive nuances, which is I am a big fan of including others in an organization outside the CEO in the board committees of that particular board, right? And a good example of this is the CFO being involved or being available for certain times on a finance committee, or the CIO or CSIO security officer being involved in or available to the technology committee. Those types of areas are a great way to stay connected to the organization without overstepping the bounds of the board.
Perfect. How and where can I get some guidance on creating these board documents?
Yeah, these do take some work. It's a little bit of a different mindset. Without sounding like I'm pitching our program, I will tell you that we overlay through 12 sessions of not just the modern board operations, but there's some work in understanding how you successfully package yourself in your board documents, leveraging that modern day board operations knowledge. We do that in our program. I view it as one of our biggest differentiators. It includes all the templates, includes all of the selection of your core leadership traits, what we call your major and your minors, and even aligning what's called your career trifecta, which is a balance of your expertise, your experience, and your proof or certification or education areas, and properly doing that. So in summary, part of the reason for our program is to allow directors to have an outlet for all the guidance they need on creating these successfully, all the templating, and in some cases, the ability to have them reviewed and critiqued.
Perfect. And I'm going to see if I can squeeze in 2 more questions here.
Sure.
The director time commitment is a lot of time per board. Do you see many nonprofit directors committing to this time?
Yeah, it's a good question. My answer, quite honestly, is no. If I go right to the honesty button. And it's a problem, quite frankly. I mean, most nonprofit boards, even the existing directors of those organizations, feel that, well, you're volunteering your time and there's no compensation, so we should lower our expectations of these directors. I think it's a mistake. I really think that the same time commitment and expectations and involvement should be expected of a nonprofit director as compared to a public or a private organization. You still have the same responsibilities as a director, maybe minus some of the transparency or disclosure aspects of a public company, but you still have an organization to support. You still have a mission, a vision, and values to oversee and to guide. You still have research to do and comparison and metrics to measure. It's just, quite frankly, to me, it's impossible even for a nonprofit board to be successful when that expectation is not set to that level. And you see these people, you see directors that are the only time their name pops up or you see their face is during the board meeting. And they're asking questions that were discussed, 6 months ago. Those are the typical challenges we see with nonprofit board directors. And many times it comes back to their lack of understanding or commitment to the time commitment.
Great. So thank you so much, everyone, for great questions. And I know we have some to follow up with as well. So, of course, for further information about Shapeparency and to schedule a demo or access your free 14-day Shapeparency test drive, you can visit shapeparency.com. To enroll in this global education and certification course hosted by our education partner and today's speaker, visit shapeparency.com/board education. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in today. And thank you again, Mark, for sharing these tips and deep insight in how we can all get that first board seat or add additional board seats. Have a great rest of your day and see you again soon.